Hello and welcome back. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Hangry Mexican. I realized that in booking guests for this podcast, I just know a ton of reporter and journalist friends of mine that I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't, talk to them for this podcast. And so I created the Newsmakers series featured here on the Hangry Mexican Podcast. With interviews about their careers and about their input and perspective in the news business. I realize there's a lot of people out there that are either aspiring journalists or that are just curious to see how the news business works. And in today's episode, I have a dear friend of mine who's had quite an interesting journey in the news world. She's currently a journalist over in the Kansas City, Missouri area. But before then, she was in California. She's worked for both Spanish-speaking and English-speaking news stations. And so we get her perspective on that. We talk about her career, a little bit about her upbringing, and even Game of Thrones. So without further ado, let's get this episode started. I think it's going to be a really interesting, a really good episode. So tune in. I know it's a little bit longer than the other ones, but I think it's totally worth it. All right, DJ, roll that music. All right. Well, thank you for being here on this podcast and joining me, Bianca.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. I love podcasts, so I'm really excited to be part of one now.
Oh, yeah. Well, do you podcast yourself?
I don't, and I've talked about it so many times, starting a podcast, but really it's a time investment. So I just stick to listening to other people's podcasts.
And what do you listen to currently?
Well, I have a range. So I'll listen to a podcast called In the Thick, which is hosted by a journalist that I admire, Maria Hinojosa and Julio Ricardo Varela. They have, they're part of their own kind of production company. They also have a side podcast called Latino USA, which I love as well. But then on the other spectrum, I listen to Jonathan Van Ness's Getting Curious podcast. So he's one of the Fab Five from Queer Eye. And so he has his own podcast where he will just explore topics that he's curious about and find experts to teach him more about those topics. So it really is, you have some journalists that have been covering topics for a really long time, and then you have JVN, who is a newbie to certain topics and kind of puts it in layman's terms for his listeners. So, of course, This is American Life. I know another reporter, Natalie Brunel, who's doing Career Stories podcast. So really anything that I can fit into my drive, because I have about a half-hour drive to work. So it's a perfect time for a podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Like I ever since I started working in LA and I have to commute almost an hour each way, I started just listening to podcasts, and there's some really good ones that I listen to. Most of them are interview based. So, you just grab somebody and you interview them. They're pretty simple. Plus, the podcast that we are recording and creating at the TV station I work for, they're somewhat similar. We got like a political show, which is awesome. I really like that. And then we have Christine Divine, who's like a staple in LA. She's like the primetime Fox 11 news anchor, and so she has her podcast that actually just launched recently called Olympic and Bundy. So she took it over. She's the second host ever of that podcast, and so I listen to that too because there's a lot of cool professionals and experts that go in there, and it's just it's fun. It's fun to listen to these podcasts because you learn a lot. And so with this one here, with the Hangry Mexican, don't let the title fool you.
Right.
with this podcast, what I think I'm going to do, since I am, in the world of news, is just have awesome folks like yourself come on this podcast and be part of the Newsmakers series. So
Awesome.
yeah. So then you've been doing news for how long now?
Oh, it was 5 years in March that I was a professional broadcast journalist. I started in March of 2014, and when we met, I was a reporter in MMJ for a Univision affiliate, Univision Costa Central, which was based in Santa Maria, California, reporting Spanish language news, and as an MMJ, doing it all, filming, doing the interviews, editing, and putting the stories together myself. So that was my first job in TV news.
And how was it from going from doing, an all um, Spanish reports and stories to all of a sudden going into the English speaking market? Was that difficult?
It was a shift, I would say. For me, it was, I would say, easier because while I'm fluent in Spanish, I learned growing up from my family. I feel like I think in English, and anyone who's bilingual, that might make sense, is that you think primarily in one language and then translate as you go. So there were some challenges when I was a Spanish language reporter in that certain idioms and phrases don't quite translate. And so there were some moments where I would have scripts reviewed by the news director, and he would have to make those corrections, saying like, that's not exactly what you think it means. So an example that makes me laugh all the time is, in English you would say, to shed light on an issue, and that means to bring attention to it or highlight what's going on. And I tried to translate that in Spanish, and somehow in retrospect it's really silly, but I came up with um, dar luz, which means to give light literally, but what it means in Spanish is to give birth. And so that's not exactly what I meant. And my boss at the time was like, I think we can word this a little differently. um, and that really was one of the biggest challenges for me, is that I learned Spanish through family at home, and growing up we're not really talking about homicides or investigations, or there are terms that come up in reporting that wouldn't really be said at the dinner table. So I did have to do a bit of Googling and finessing. One of my mentors gave me good advice to read books written by Jorge Ramos, who is the primary anchor at Univision, and read his books in Spanish because he was talking about subjects that I would be familiar with as a journalist, but reading it in Spanish, I would pick up those vocabulary terms that I wouldn't necessarily know from casual conversation. So I really enjoyed it, though. I think, going back to that shift, is in Spanish language news, at least in my experience, it felt like we were advocates for our viewers, and we would have weekly segments providing legal information. So we would interview a local lawyer about immigration questions or anything else that our viewers wanted to know. And so we were very much representing them, and we would do, and a lot of stations do this regardless of language, is just consumer investigations. Viewers would come forward with an experience that they had, and we would look into it. But I definitely felt that, I think part of it was just being in such a small community and a small station, that we were very embedded in the community. And so switching to English language news, I feel like there was a little bit more emphasis in being neutral, being objective, and not having too much of a personal stake in the story. But as I said, even now, especially in bigger markets with larger resources, there is that ability to be on their side and advocate for them in situations that are unfair or unjust. So I think it just depends on where you are and what the station is capable of. But like, for example, now I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, And we have an investigative team, and uh, some of our reporters will do stories like that where there's problems with landlords or there are problems with purchases, experiences at hotels, and they'll look into it for them and really dig into, what's going on, what the problem is, and often we'll have, happy outcomes. One story that I just did was about a tornado siren that was broken in a small town, and we went and reported on the fact that it was broken and called the company because the siren was supposed to have been fixed, but when the crew came out to fix it, they were unsuccessful because the truck was too short to reach the tornado siren, which was on a tall pole. And soon after, just the other day, I got a call from the mayor saying they're coming out tomorrow to fix it. And they thanked us for our reporting because he felt like that helped get that resolved quicker than it might have been. So that always feels really good.
Oh yeah, no, I mean I hear you on that. That's one of the reasons why I love doing what I do, and news is one of those unique careers that actually allows you to change the lives of people, oftentimes for the better. And That's why I love the station too I'm with currently, because even though it's Los Angeles and you would think it's a big market, I mean it is number two market in the country for news. You can still get your local community stories, which is just awesome. And I just love those stories. So how do you feel? Or actually, better question yet is, how did you feel the first time that somebody came up to you and said, I love your reporting, and I love that it changed my life in a positive way?
Oh, wow. It's so fulfilling to hear from the community and to get their feedback. And I definitely felt it when I moved. So I was working in Salinas, California, before moving out to the Midwest in November. And the send off was just incredible. And I'm going to try not to cry
Oh,
reliving
it's
it.
all
But,
right.
um, so many people said, you were like our daughter. You were like
Mm-hmm.
one of our family. Just hearing you tell the stories, and they would say things like, "We can tell that you care," and I did care
Mm-hmm.
because, and I still do, because a lot of the stories, you meet people on their worst days. A lot of the time, they've just lost someone that they care about, and then as a reporter, you show up, and for me, it was about giving them a chance to tell their story. I always tell people when I show up after a shooting or some kind of tragic crime, I just want to give your son, your daughter, whoever it is, a chance to be remembered the way that you want them to be remembered. Give me your favorite picture of them. Tell me your favorite story of them. Because if it were me or someone that I cared about, I would hope that they would at least get, 15, 30, minute 30 seconds of time to be recognized in the world. And so, one of the most impactful, I think, interactions like that for me was I went to a shooting. It was the day after a young man was killed, and understandably, the family was very upset. And this was when
Mm-hmm.
I was an MMJ, so I went by myself, and they were saying, we don't want you here. They were angry because a lot of people think that we're trying to capitalize on a tragic situation or what have you. And I told them, why I was there, what my intentions were, and I, shared my condolences. And it's always hard for me to see people crying.
Mm-hmm.
It's whenever people are mourning, I feel it. I can't just look at someone who is upset and not offer a hug or something, And so I left, and in that moment, it kind of felt like I had failed because I had to return without the story, at least without an interview from the family. And we air the story with what we've got. And probably a year later, I was covering a story about an organization in Salinas that was started by a woman who lost her son. several years ago. I think it was about 15 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called A Time for Grieving and Healing. And what she does is she reaches out to other mothers who have lost sons, daughters, family members to gun violence. And in recent years, she's started rallies. She's gone to the Capitol during Victims Week and just offers comfort, support. As they say, a club that nobody wants to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
they were having this rally. They had started a website called the Cold Case Campaign. And they said, these cases have gone unsolved for several years. No one is coming forward. The police have nothing to work with. And we still don't have justice. And so she created this website and was collecting donations to provide a reward for information,
Mm-hmm.
hoping that with that, venue that did not involve police, that people would come forward anonymously. And so I was covering the story, and a woman who was at that crime scene a year prior, that they didn't want to talk to me, and I was feeling dejected because I wasn't able to tell her family member's story. She said, "I remember you, and you were very," I forget what the word was that she used, but she said, "You were very kind, you were very considerate, and I'm sorry, that
Mm-hmm.
it didn't work out then, but she said thank you for continuing to tell these stories, because a year later she had seen how many other stories like that I had reported, and
Mm-hmm.
that felt really good." It's bittersweet because I don't want to tell these stories. I don't want there to be young people losing their lives this way. But as long as it keeps happening, we will be there to give them a chance to say, this is who my son or daughter was, and this is why we want justice, um, so that meant a lot to me, just to be recognized. And she didn't have to say that, she could go on with her life and not think about me again, but that was very rewarding.
Yeah. No, and that's amazing because there's a lot of reporters out there, a lot of newsmakers out there that don't well, for the most part, they have these traits, like you just said, the ability to care and to be professional and considerate and sympathize. But then there's a sect, a group out there of reporters too that don't have those skills. I'm sure you probably encountered some of these folks along your journey in news. Some people that can't really, don't have those social skills, if you will, to deal with things like that. And so oftentimes it comes across as rude, and that person might end up calling the station or to complain or having other issues. um, but I think that's one of the reasons, like the way you are, and the way you carry yourself. I think that's one of the reasons why you are where you are. You've been, I knew you before you got into news, which is the awesome thing to see you grow in this field and doing a great job at it. Because before then you were, correct me if I'm wrong, UCSB student, right? That was
Yes,
your, okay. and
class of
and
2013.
and UCSB, I think now actually they're starting to get together to start maybe a journalism program there. But when you were there was no journalism program. So how in the world did you decide you wanted to get into news? And how was your experience being a student there at UCSB?
It's funny because so I was when I went to UC Santa Barbara, I was a political science major. I graduated high school wanting to be an ambassador for the United Nations. So
Hmm.
I was studying international relations, from the get-go. And um, this came from my experience as a volunteer with the California Association of Student Councils, or CASC for short,
Uh-huh.
which is a statewide organization run by and led completely by teenagers. There are literally only 2 adults in the organization who do the accounting and that sort of thing, but everything else is run by students. And so they do a number of programs throughout the state, summer camps, and they do a conference at the state capitol with the State Board of Education, giving students a chance to create bills and propose them to the State Board of Education. There's also a global conference where students come up with ideas for making the world a better place. So I was involved with this organization for years as a camp counselor, as one of their uh, uh, officials. They had like what was called a state council, basically their own government running and planning all these things. And so from that experience, I was able to step out of Oxnard, which is my hometown, and meet people from all over the state, see what different people were doing and working on and their ideas. And so that broadened my horizons. And I thought, well, I can go to the United Nations. I want to make a difference. So I went to UCSB and I was studying political science. And unfortunately, my what I recall from the program is that the United Nations was not held. It was basically my bubble was popped in that, it wasn't as simple as I thought it would be. And obviously, being an ambassador to the United Nations is a very ambitious goal. So I was a student at UCSB and I realized, well, okay, maybe that's not quite where I'm going to end up. So I think it was my sophomore year or junior year. I had a roommate in my sorority who was a transfer student. She was a film major, and she was doing really cool internships and writing papers about really interesting ideas in film, and that caught my attention. And so I became a film major halfway through, and really enjoyed writing about the ideas that were discussed. I enjoyed the visuals that we would watch and study. And there were some classes talking about the history of media from print to radio to television, and how that has evolved and what an important role media has played in society, both in informing the community and uh, providing pop culture and just being at the center. I mean, when you watch movies, when there's something happening, they have a reporter in the movie to help explain things. Someone's turning on the TV to watch the news to figure out what's going on, what is the end of the world in that scenario. So, I got to see how important that was. And as you mentioned, UCSB didn't have necessarily a broadcast journalism program. So a friend of mine said, the student paper called The Bottom Line is hiring students. They're looking for writers. And so that's where I started with the paper, and I really loved the access that I had as a student reporter. I remember, I think the first story I did was, why does UCSB not have a football team? And I was able to send questions to Chancellor Yang, and he provided responses. And, I did stories on various topics that I would contact experts and public safety officials, and being able to ask them questions on behalf of other students, because that was our audience at the time, was really exciting, because it was like one of our directors, she was the teacher and guidance for us as students, says, you are gatekeepers of information. And so it is your responsibility to make sure that your audience, that the people that are reading or listening to your news, get the information that they need to be informed citizens. And so that felt very powerful. The paper shared a mentor, Monica Lopez, with the radio station on campus, KCSB. And yes, I think I got that right. And so I auditioned or signed up to work for the radio station because I thought that would be really fun. And it was, because that just elevated that reporting process to recording audio and being able to take people somewhere with the sounds that what we call nat sound, that you might hear in that environment. So that was where I started getting into broadcast. I was putting together stories. I was anchoring the weekly news program. And through KCSB, I actually got to cover the 2012 Republican and Democratic National Conventions. They sent us to Florida and to North Carolina to be there, and I mostly reported on the protests that were happening outside of the convention, but we did a lot of reporting leading up to that, talking to listeners throughout the community. I remember interviewing the mayor of Santa Barbara and a lot of different people about what are some of the issues that matter and what are they hoping will come out of the presidential election in that year. So that was really exciting. I had never been really to those states, so it also gave me another chance to get out of my comfort zone and travel and see a little bit more of the country. And so by that point, I mean, I was hooked. The possibilities that come with journalism of talking to different people, learning new things, going places, and at the end of the day, providing that information back to the public so they can make informed decisions about their lives. I mean, that was amazing. So at this point, I was a senior at UCSB and graduating a film major. I had that experience working for the radio station and the paper. So the natural next step for me was to get an internship with an NPR station in Pasadena, KPCC. So I did that for the summer after I graduated, actually. And that was amazing. That further got me into the world of journalism. I got to learn from some amazing award-winning journalists there who gave me great advice, and I got to see them working and how fast-paced things were. And I remember one day, I'm an intern at this big radio station in the Los Angeles area, and I was working on a story about, I think at the time they were trying to start a domain .la. So local businesses, instead of having, their business.com, it would be .la. And so they said, find out what you can about this and you can help us put a story together. So as a journalist, as I had been doing, I reached out to the mayor of Los Angeles at the time. And I talked to their communications person, and they, we were in touch. And that day, the editor who was overseeing me, my supervisor, he said, please tell us before you reach out to the mayor of Los Angeles. He said, because
Oh,
we have other reporters that are working on stories and we don't want to bombard them. And at the time, I was just this intern, and I thought it was no big deal because I had just covered the conventions and I'd met the mayor of Los Angeles out there. And, to me, it was, looking back, I was definitely overstepping what I was supposed to be doing, but it's part of the process, right? You want the information, you go to the source. So I remember when I left, the supervisor took me out to lunch and he says, I definitely see how much of a go-getter you are and that ambition that you have to make things happen. And he said, that's great. But it was definitely, looking back, funny because as an intern, they have certain expectations of you, and I was ready to just hit the ground running. So from there, if you listen to NPR, my experience was that a lot of the people that are on the radio have been there for a very long time. And so
and that
I
could get
think
intimidating.
right, right. And so I was expecting, I'd have to be like, an intern or an assistant or kind of work my way up. And who knows if I would ever be on the air again like I was in college. And I looked at television. Well, there's a television station in almost every major city. So there are more opportunities, I felt like, to make it there. And I applied wherever I could. At the time, I had moved back home to Oxnard, so within the driving radius. Mind you, that internship in Pasadena, I was driving 3 hours every day to get there. So that was kind of the radius that I was looking at. Where can I drive to make this possible?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I always try to tell young aspiring journalists is that it's not going to happen overnight. I must have sent out hundreds of job applications after graduating from college, and had branched out, when I didn't hear back from news stations, to anything tangentially related to media production. And it wasn't until so I had this bright idea that I would go to the Santa Barbara Tequila Festival,
Hmm.
and I figured there'd be a lot of people there. I could network, and it would likely be covered by the local news. So I signed up to be one of the ambassadresses, is what they call them. Basically, they're representatives who kind of mingled with the public and was like the face of the tequila festival. Um, and so I was there and participating and shaking hands with everybody that I could, fresh out of college, looking for a job. Um, and there were a few television stations there, and one of them was Univision. And so I went up to the reporter when I had a break, and I said, I would love to be doing what you're doing. What advice do you have for me? How can I get there? And we chatted a little bit, and we exchanged contact info. And then over the next couple of weeks, I followed up. I sent my resume at the time and the work that I had done, which at that point was only radio and print.
Hmm.
And he said, well, we are hiring, and you can come in and we want to interview you. We'll do some screen tests because obviously you've never been on television before. And they took that chance on me. And they were based in Santa Maria. So I drove from Oxnard, which is also about 3-hour drive,
Hmm.
and practiced my Spanish so I could do the interview in Spanish. And they put me on the set. They did some tests. They had me um, answer some questions. They said, you've never edited before. Um, what kind of experience do you have? And I said, well, actually, I signed up for lynda.com and have been trying to teach myself how to edit. I had film major friends who knew how to edit, and, they were helping me out. And I said, if you just give me the chance, I will do whatever it takes to make it work. And they did. They took a chance on me. I was hired, and I learned everything I needed to know, to get by in that first week. They showed me how to use the camera, how to report for television, and then I hit the ground running.
I just love the way that your mind works. And the one thing I admire about you is that you have never, throughout this experience, you have never once said, I'm entitled to this, or have that sense of entitlement, like so many other people do. And uh, just your willingness to keep learning is to me, it's just an amazing thing to see. And that's why when I first met you, I saw that you had that drive to just keep learning, no matter how high in the chain you got. And I mean, do you remember the time when we both went to uh, Hal Eisner's Camp News? This is a
Yes.
camp for aspiring journalists, and you were already a reporter on air in Santa Barbara or Santa Maria reporting Spanish news. Yet you showed up as a student, even though technically you should have been a mentor that year, but you showed up as a student.
Yes. Yes. So I'd gone to uh in Montana. You had her on your podcast. She talked about this. There was this conference organized by a student at UCSB because there wasn't a program for students interested in journalism. So
Hmm.
she organized a conference to get local reporters and experts, to provide students with some advice. At that camp, I learned about Hal Eisner's camp. And so at that point, when I signed up for Hal Eisner's camp, I was waiting to hear back. Hopefully, I would get that job. By the time
Hmm.
camp rolled around, I had already been reporting for, if that was in December, that would have been about 8 months. So I was already a professional journalist for 8 months. But like I said, I didn't have that training in school, and I was learning on the job. And it was a little bit funny because, the camp provided a mock scenario with real firefighters and actors coming in to provide this realistic emergency, and then the firefighters and the police officers that were volunteering their time held a press conference. And so it was a little bit surreal for me because I'd covered press conferences and I knew exactly what it was that they were trying to simulate. And
Hmm.
so um, it was interesting to watch these students and aspiring reporters, shout out their questions and do things to kind of stand out and be noticed by all of the news directors and professional people that were there. Um, but it also gave me a weird opportunity to, it's kind of like I don't want to sound odd, but like an out of body experience where you don't, when you're in it, when you're in the moment, you're at a press conference or you're covering something, you just are go, go, go. And so being in that simulated experience gave me a chance to kind of step back and look at the anatomy of what was happening and
Hmm.
kind of reflect on, okay, what are the things that I'm doing in real life that now I can examine and see, like, okay, this can be done better. For example, I don't know, simple things like putting the microphone on the podium and being able to take pictures on my phone and taking notes, and how can I be more efficient? How can I ask questions better so that I can get better answers from the public officials who tend to speak, in cop speak, as we say. And I can watch as young aspiring journalists are learning and glean, okay, this is what I know, this is what I didn't know. And it was just super helpful to hear from the news directors that were there and reporters that were there. I mean, you can never stop learning. Even now, I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm still learning on how to do things better. There are situations that you can't prepare for, and so I think I will never feel like I'm done. The minute you stop learning is the minute I think that you just need to find something else to do because that's what keeps it interesting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that assessment because I'm the same way. I love learning, and every chance I get to learn something, I love it. When I created this podcast, well, I've had two previous attempts before. One of them, well, both of them being news, but one of them I was actually hosting with my now wife Claire, who you know as
Mhm.
well, and it took a while. I didn't really know how to you know get things started off the ground. And then the second time around was for my former TV station, Santa Barbara, that I tried to get a podcast up. And I did. I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but when I was there, we launched that. And on these based on these two experiences of podcasting, when I created this Hangry Mexican podcast, I had already the experience, but I knew that I had to learn more. And so that's why, well, it's one of the reasons also why I'm so thankful that I work where I work, because, we create podcasts and there's a method to it. There's a method to the madness, as is in most cases when you're doing something. And it's amazing to learn not just through research but also by doing. And that's one of the things that school may teach you the theory behind it, but it really does take, especially in the profession that we're in, it really does take a hands-on approach
Mhm.
to learning. And like you said, the situation is never the same in news. It's ever changing. You could be at a press conference one day, and then all of a sudden you're at the scene of a shooting another day, and you're by yourself, and that poses some challenges. So then now I want to go back to the first story that you went to, that was breaking news, and you're
Mhm.
out there by yourself doing the camera, then doing the editing, doing an interview. And how nerve-wracking was that experience?
It's definitely a challenge, especially when you are carrying all of the equipment, because you're trying to figure out, what's going on, which way to go. You want to capture the moment, but also, it's kind of hard to talk to someone when you're carrying a tripod and a camera over your shoulder sometimes. And it can be really intimidating for some people to see the camera. And so now, as a reporter, I have the ability to go ahead of the photographer without the camera and talk to them first, and then invite the camera in and be a little bit more tactful in that way. But um, you also have a team with you, a partner who, they're capturing some video, and you can keep your eye out for other things that are going on, get information. So it's definitely challenging. And um, in a breaking news situation, it it can be really tough to just deal. I think, one of the things that reporters, don't really get a chance to discuss, and I think it's happening a lot more lately, is we're also feeling whatever's happening. One of the craziest situations that I think I've ever been in was there was that um, shooting in Isla Vista, and you covered it extensively. Um,
Hmm.
but that was my alma mater, where several people were killed in a mass shooting. And that weekend, the station that I was working for at the time didn't have a weekend newscast, so we weren't scheduled to be working that weekend. And so I was out of town. Um, but I was still living in the area, and I think about, that was my home at the time, and it had been my home for 4 years as a college student. And so when I returned Monday, I went to my alma mater as a reporter to cover this tragedy. And I'm trying to get the job done, but I'm also dealing with the fact that this happened there where I went to school.
Hmm.
And
It's okay. I feel the same way. I walked those streets when I was a student at UCSB, and being born and raised in Santa Barbara. When you uh, hear of this happening so close to you, it's just you don't lose your humanity, and that's the one thing that I think a lot of people need to realize, that even though you're out there doing a job and you're reporting, you just don't lose who you are. You don't lose your humanity, and you want to be as professional as you can. But there are times when you're gonna have to. Uh, have that your humanness come out, and for me in particular it was um crying,
mhm,
and it wasn't in public, it was in private, and but it made me realize that everybody's human. You can't be RoboCop out there and be um, this reporter that is out there just covering the story and has no emotional or no emotions showing at all.
mhm,
There's always a component there that you have to deal with, and that's being human. And I think this conversation is actually really important for those that are listening to this, that are aspiring journalists,
mhm,
that are asking, well, how do you deal with a tragic event like that, um, where you have to go up to talk to people that may have had, um, uh, you know, in the case of Isla Vista, maybe a friend shot, or maybe it just they were neighbors, and this tragedy happened, and they were almost directly impacted by it. And
mhm.
um, how do you even begin to approach a situation like that as a reporter? What through your journey and your experience, what did you find out? How is it for those people that again are listening to this podcast, that are asking, well, during these tough situations, how do you approach somebody to ask an interview question that was or has been directly impacted by the event.
Hmm. Well, I think the number one thing is just being human. Everybody has a story. Most people have gone through something, and we often don't talk about it. But I, can draw from my own experiences, that being one, um, to relate to people of what they're going through. And for me, one of the biggest motivators as a journalist is having a heart and remembering that there's always more to the story, and it's not always as simple as some people might want to make it. Um, when I approach people who have lost someone, um, I think about the feelings that I've felt, in my life,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to crime. Um, my father is incarcerated, and he has
Hmm.
been since I was in high school, and that has affected my family. Um, and so I know that what it feels like not have a parent around, um, and to have tragic situations affect your family and your life. Um, and going back to that initial experience as a journalist, uh, for Univision is, we're here for you. At least I can say that. I'm here for you, and I know that situations are tough and they're complicated. Um, and we're here so you could share your story if you want to, and respect that if you don't want to. Um, because one of the toughest things covering Isla Vista was by the time that I showed up on Monday, um, people were tired of reporters being there. That was, so
Yeah.
many different networks and stations had sent someone that students were putting up signs and telling media to go away. And for me as a graduate, I had just graduated the summer before. That hurt, that I was living in Isla Vista the summer before. I walked those streets, and so it's just finding the way that you can relate to people and building that trust and saying, maybe I don't know exactly what you're going through, but this is what I have experienced, and this is how I can understand, what somewhat of what you're going through.
And um, you're right. I've heard um, colleagues tell me that um, the big boys, meaning the networks, may show up in town for a day or two covering the story, but it's the local TV station that has to be there after everybody leaves, and we have to continue following up on stories that happen in the community, especially in tragic events. It's never ending. A lot of the big boys, cover the initial story, but then there's all these other stories that come out from it that really are uh, hyper local, but that are very important stories to tell. And so long after everybody leaves, you're you're staying there. You're staying
Yeah.
behind, and you're covering these stories, and you can relate to them because you are part of that community. And so I'm really thankful that I got to be part of the community in my time doing news in Santa Barbara, and that never changes. I think
Mhm.
people will recognize your um, uh, being a genuine person. And one of the things that I'm currently working on, and by the time this podcast airs or this episode airs, I might be more involved in the community that I now serve. But I'd love to, when I'm not working, go out in the town and just experience the community, because I've always believed that you cannot be as effective of a journalist, a reporter, a newsmaker if you don't understand the community that you're serving. And so in
Mhm.
order for you to do that, you have to be out and about. Go to events, on the weekends. Go just walk around a neighborhood. Of course, be safe about it, but go walk around, meet people, go to a coffee shop and talk to people, talk to
Mhm.
somebody, get to know the local atmosphere. And then when you're covering a story, then you have that knowledge, you have that experience, you understand that community. And so
Absolutely.
now that I've been covering news in Los Angeles, I've covered news that takes place in areas where I've never actually been to. I've driven through some of those, but I've never actually gotten out to just walk around. And so I did that
Mhm.
recently, and it felt so good. It felt so good just feeling the vibe. And then when another story came up, and a lot of people think that it's usually crime stories, but no, there's a lot of positive stories, and so I've had a chance to cover those as well. And so when these stories came out, after I had kind of walked around the community and visited some shops and eaten at some restaurants, all of a sudden I realized, oh, I know exactly where that is. Oh, that,
Mhm.
yeah, 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 okay. And this is the vibe from this place, and this is why this story is so important to that community, and why it should be important for everybody else to care about. But it's that experience that you get from being so ingrained in the community.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that you've experienced yourself going on this on your journey as a newscaster. A lot of people actually start, a lot of people start in small markets, and that's a great opportunity for you to be involved in the community. And that's what you've been doing. You've been starting, your humble beginnings included a small market, and so
Mhm.
gradually you're getting into bigger markets. And uh, that's like I said before, that's a great thing to see. And for everybody listening to this podcast that might be wanting to get into news, um, yeah, you have this journey that has not been the easiest.
Mhm.
And so what has been in your case one of the hardest things that you've had to adjust to in your career?
Well, what has been really interesting is, I'm from Oxnard, which is uh, about an hour away from Los Angeles, but it's an agricultural town. I grew up across the street from strawberry fields. That's where
Hmm.
my grandmother actually worked. She worked in the strawberry fields and um, ended up selling food to farm workers when she started her own catering business. So I was very um, connected, in that way, to the agricultural side of my hometown. So when I got my first job in Santa Maria, it felt very much like home, even though I was moving, packing up for the first time, besides college, which I feel like doesn't really doesn't really count because I was in Santa Barbara. I was only 45 minutes away from home. I was moving out for the first time, and so having that similarity to home was very comforting. And then from there, I went to Salinas, which is also another agricultural town, the salad bowl of the world, it's called. And it felt a lot like home. And when I left, it felt like I was, leaving home because of the life that I had created there for myself and the years that I worked there. And so while I was moving around and doing all this, my mom moved to Kansas. She moved right after I graduated from college, and she says she was kicking the bird out of the nest. She wanted me to be able to just jump and go for my dreams and be able to fly without a safety net. And she said that was the best way for me to just succeed is just to do it and not have a home to return to. I mean, of course, I'm always welcome in our house. That's where I'm right now, actually. So that's why I moved to the Midwest, is to be with my mom and my little sister, who is 13 right now. Um, I miss them so much, and that was one of the hardest things. Is, it was good to be on my own for a while and get that kick to get my career started, but the entire time I miss them. And so when this opportunity came up to reunite with them, I took it. And so I never lived outside of California, and like I said, all of the towns that I'd lived in were pretty similar in a lot of ways. Um, and so moving to the Midwest has been an adjustment. This is the farthest I've ever been from the ocean. And there are so many things that I have to relearn, laws, geography, the weather. There's so many things that
Mhm.
are new, and so I feel like I've been dropped in a different world, but it's finding those similarities that help me connect. So it is an agricultural area, outside of Kansas City. There are some rural areas that I've visited through my reporting that, it's different. It's not the strawberry fields and the lettuce fields that I'm used to, but there are farms, and that way of life I can understand. People are so kind here. That's been very helpful. My coworkers have been amazing, welcoming me and helping me through the process of my first winter. And, it just goes back to that curiosity. Um, I could complain, that I was cold or whatever, but I'd never known that there were so many different kinds of snow. I'd never seen frost before. It's beautiful. It sparkles. There's soft snow that you can jump in. There's crunchy ice that you can stomp on. There was one day where the trees were covered in ice, and when the sun set, it looked like a chandelier. It's like nothing I've ever seen or experienced before. And when the entire town is covered in white snow, it's like being in a Hallmark card. It's beautiful.
Oh,
It's
yes.
just incredible, especially for someone who has never seen that before. And my coworkers laugh at me. They say, "Oh, you're so adorable." Just wait. After your first winter, you'll get over it. But there's just something to be in awe of. Of just the seasons. Of the world. Every day you just never know what you're gonna get. Now we're going into tornado season. I had to Google what a tornado siren sounded like because
Ooh, that's scary.
I had never heard of one before. And so it's just all, yeah, it is scary, and it can be dangerous, but it's interesting. I am still, like I said, 5 years into my career, still learning and experiencing new things.
Mhm. Yeah, my mother-in-law lives over in New Hampshire,
Mm.
and I've been going over there to visit for quite a few years now, and a lot of those visits are during uh, snowy days. So usually during winter time, with the exception of maybe one time, which was more towards the end of fall, I believe. But either way, um, I always have a great time in the snow because you're right. It's so beautiful. It's so amazing to see that and actually have real seasons. But being from Southern California myself, I just I get the same weather practically year round. So
Yeah.
when I go over there to visit, all I want to do is play in the snow.
Mhm.
And uh yeah, I mean, Claire actually prefers to wear sandals and be in the sandy beach, but I always tell her that um, I just love the snow. And this past year, well, one of the things in my bucket list was to have a white Christmas.
Yeah.
And we did that. We did that last year. We went over to New Hampshire for Christmas, also New Year's. But I mean, it was the thing was, and this is just unbelievable what happened. But when we got there, the land was covered in snow, but it wasn't supposed to be snowing
Hmm.
all through from that point on. I think all through like the new year, there was not supposed to be any snow, and then all of a sudden, we're watching the weather report uh, the day before Christmas Eve, and the forecaster says, it's a little quite unusual what's happening here, but you're going to be getting snow um, New Year. I mean, Christmas Eve. Yeah, Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, and I was like, what? After expecting not to get snow falling, and all of a sudden, yeah,
It's a
just
Christmas
like that.
miracle.
Exactly. Yes. Christmas miracle. And I loved it. I felt, oh man, I was just running out there. Just, it was so cool. So cool. Such
Yeah.
a neat experience. And so that's why, I haven't traveled abroad. Well, with the exception of Mexico, of course, but
Mhm.
I haven't actually traveled abroad. I've traveled, and I'm starting to travel a lot more within the United States because we just live in a gorgeous country. You can find
Mhm.
anything out there. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
one of my trips that I really want to do is just visit, Montana.
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I totally feel what you're saying. You go from California to the Midwest. Every single place has something unique to
Mhm.
offer, and it comes back to what I love about you, which is you never stop learning. You have that sense of wonder that I I think it's lost in many people, but you manage to just keep it alive, and it makes you, I think, who you are.
Thank you. I mean, you know, it's I think it's just about being grateful. If you had told me, let's see, well, this is actually 10 years since I graduated from high school. If you told me, when I was graduating from high school that this is where I was going to end up, be just I wouldn't believe it. It's an incredible opportunity that I have to do what I do every day and have such an amazing career. I've done incredible things. I've flown with a stunt pilot. I've uh, met incredible people. I've been places where other people aren't allowed. Like behind the fire line during wildfires. Waiting around in flooding. Watching police do incredible things, firefighters. I mean, the experiences that I've had are countless, and I just have to be grateful because this could all end, tomorrow, and you have to just appreciate every day. And these experiences, like coming here to the Midwest and seeing the snow and living through it. It was scary at times. I must have not paid attention during driver's ed on how to drive through the snow because I didn't think I needed it. That was intense. But recently I went back to California for a wedding, and when I went back to the
Mhm.
ocean, I appreciated it so much more. And even though I'd always seen it since I was a kid and lived near it, going back and putting my toes in the sand and the water, it felt like the first time. It's just, you got to love everything, all of these experiences. They're all beautiful and all amazing. And what I love about my job is that I get to focus on it. I get to do stories about the things that we take for granted, or things that are happening
what
that we don't even notice.
and what do you think is like the scariest thing about uh, getting out there and moving and going to a different town that you don't know?
Hmm. Well, the hardest thing about moving around is, initially it was being away from family, but this move has
Hmm.
brought me closer to family. And now I'm away from friends that I've made, incredible friendships that I have made in, um, you know, the markets that I've worked in. And it's also just being in a new place, um, that you just haven't quite figured out where you belong. And so that's a process. But like you say, it's about getting out there and um, exploring. And it's kind of weird, having my childhood home sold and my family moved away from my hometown. It kind of feels like I don't. Like California will always be home, but
Hmm.
I don't have that like house to go back to. Um, and I go back to UCSB and reminisce, but that has changed a lot. I've gone back to my high school and things change. My hometown has changed, and so in one way it's kind of sad, but in another way it's freeing in that I'm
Yeah.
free to go anywhere. The
Yeah.
world is my home.
You're a world citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and for me, 10 years ago would have been a scary thing to move away from my hometown, move away from my family and friends. And now it's no big deal, no biggie to me.
Hmm.
And so I just love exploring. I remember the first time, LA for me just seemed like a foreign place growing up, a place that was far away. And I think it might have been during my teen years when I decided to just uh, grab my friend and my brother, get on a bus, Greyhound bus, and just go to, Hollywood, to the Hollywood Walk of Fame,
Hmm.
and just explore that. We just kind of walked around, and I mean, it was neat. But that was the first time that I've actually been walking in LA streets. Normally you go to Disneyland, so a theme park, Universal Studios. You
Hmm.
kind of just you drive and you go there, and that's it. You're staying within those boundaries. But then to just be dropped somewhere by the bus, just get out and then walk around, not knowing, that was the first sense that I got that hey, this LA is not this big scary place that's across the country,
Hmm.
far away. It's relatively close. It's neat. It's cool, and um, that sense of wonder just kind of grabbed a hold of me, and so that's why I've been trying to travel a little bit more. And at times it's been challenging because of of the money. You
Right.
need money, of course, to travel. Um, and I kind of want to get your perspective on this because I feel that there are folks out there that they think that if they get into the news business, they're going to be making all this money, that it's a high paying job. But in your experience, has that been the case?
um,
And why do you do it if it's not?
right. Well, I remember not too long ago, maybe sometime last year, I did a career day in Salinas, and a little girl asked me point blank, how much money do you make?
Ooh,
And I
loaded
said, yeah,
question.
great question for a young girl who's serious about
Hmm.
her future prospects, right? And I told her, to be honest, the workers at In and Out make more than I did at my first job. Um,
Hmm.
and and I told her, it's not an industry that pays a lot when you're first getting started, but that's you have to have passion for it in order
Hmm.
to stay in it. And I think back to my family, um, my grandma, when she worked in the fields and fed farm workers, she would wake up at the crack of dawn to prepare the food and do that to support her family. And my mom, She actually got her degree the same year that I did. She had put that on hold when I was little, and she would wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning to study and do what she needed to do before I woke up and take me to school and take care of everything else, go to work. And so I think, if they could do that and survive and thrive and take care of their family and get ahead, then I can deal, with getting up at the time. My last job, I was a weekend morning anchor. I can wake up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to put makeup on and sit in a chair and talking to a camera. Like, I am so lucky to do this, and the sacrifices that I've done to get here are worth it, because I could have a very different life. I could have a very different career. And driving, 3 hours to my internship, driving 3 hours to my first job interview, crashing on couches, renting rooms in the mountains, all these things that I've done to get to this point um, are worth it. Now that I'm in a bigger market, I can say that I'm, making more money. And the higher you go, that tends to be the case. But it's not about the money for me. It's about the opportunity. Um, but absolutely, people should fight for what they deserve and negotiate and do all that. But if people are coming into this for the money, then I don't think it's going to work out.
I love that you said that. That's what I think a lot of people need to hear. That you have to go in it for the right reasons,
hmm
and if you do, it's totally worth it in the end.
hmm
And have you? Okay, so a lot of parents, they growing up, they kind of want their kid to get a job, just to get a job and kind of go into the workforce and experience how it is to have a job. So growing up for you,
hmm
did you work any quirky jobs or anything?
Yeah, and I shouldn't skip over that part after college where I had weird jobs. So luckily, my mom, she values education so much because she said she would tell me, you can be whatever you want to be. Even you could work picking up trash if that's what you want to do, but you are going to be the best at it and you're going to get an education, because no matter what happens in life, you cannot lose your education. You can lose your house, you can lose your car, you can, you know, things will happen to you, but your education is so valuable. So she encouraged me, even though it was a sacrifice for her, to focus on school. And she didn't pressure me to get a job and pay my way. And I mean, I'm paying those student loans now, but while I was in school, I wasn't pressured to have a job. And so the jobs that I did have in college were at the radio station, at the paper. I got paid like $9 an hour for that sort of thing. Um, I was also a tour guide. All of the jobs that I had were good experience. But after you graduate, you're no longer living on student loans. I moved back home and I applied, like I said, everywhere. I even applied just the most random jobs, retail. And the job that I ended up getting was it was like, how do I explain it? So it was a company that provided entertainment for parties. So that you had different
Mhm.
options. So one was laser tag, and we would go and set up all of the equipment and guide the kids at this birthday party on how, like, the rules of laser tag. We'd fix the equipment, if it was broken, that sort of thing. The other option was a video game truck. So we would drive these big trucks and they had TVs and video game consoles and all these different moving parts. And the other option was a glam truck, so similar thing, but for girls, you would do their hair, their makeup, their nails, and then there was a little stage for them to do a little fashion show with their friends. And then there was a photo booth, and that one was for, weddings, parties, one of those little mobile photo booths, and we would run all those
Mhm.
things. And um, seems like a really random job, but it was actually very helpful because, you know, you have to set up all this equipment, you have to drive this big truck. you have to deal with people of different personalities, and it could either be like the happiest day, their wedding day or their birthday party, or they're very upset when the printer in the photo booth doesn't work. And so I did that for a couple of months, and I got into some tricky situations. I remember one time I thought I lost the keys to the photo booth truck, and then I had to work with the hotel staff to look in the trash, and it was wild. But I remember one birthday party was in Santa Barbara, and the dad said that he was neighbors with Oprah. Like, you meet all these
Whoa.
interesting people. And it was one of those jobs that you're serving people, like you're there to make them happy. It was the only job I've ever had with tips, which was awesome. And you just learn how to be a people person. Soon after that, I got a job with CBS Radio as a production assistant, and it was actually similar skills. We would go to this, I think it's the Staples Center in downtown LA, and we would go to the Clippers games and set up a tent outside and do like raffles and face painting, and just kind of do pump people up for the game and do ticket giveaways. And I got that job. I wanted to do that job because I was in proximity of the radio broadcasters, but I did all the lowest part of the totem pole work, where you set up the tent and you drive the truck, and again, dealing with people and being a crowd pleaser. And but it was really great experience because of all those skills that you get, and just working, any job that you can get and work and get that experience is so valuable, even if it's tangentially related to what it is that you want to do.
And Bianca, are you a first generation Latina in your family?
Um, so my dad is from Mexico. So on his
Mhm.
side, I am first generation and first in my family to go to a four-year university. My mom was born in the United States, so I'm second generation on her side. But both of my grandparents on my mother and father's side are from Mexico.
And so yeah, I apologize. I'm drinking a little coffee because my voice seems a little raspy since we're in different time zones.
Oh yeah.
uh, but and I was catching up on my Game of Thrones last night.
Oh, so was I actually.
Really,
Yeah.
last night?
Yeah, we were watching the Battle of the Bastards episode because that's such a great fight scene.
And have you been watching the current season?
I have, and it's been tough because I work weekend nights.
Uh huh.
And so Sunday I get home, my shift ends at 11, so I usually get home around midnight. And but we must watch Game of Thrones before I go to bed.
Yeah, no, I had a free trial of HBO for Hulu because I have Hulu, love Hulu.
Okay.
And so I thought, okay, you know what? I'm gonna reserve my free trial for when I'm like, 3 episodes in,
Mhm.
and of course with the fourth one airing tonight.
Mhm.
So I want to watch that live. But yeah, have you seen the most recent episode? Like I think it's called The Long Night.
Yes, yes.
Oh man, I don't want to spoil it for anybody
Right.
listening to this podcast. Although I think by the time the episode airs, probably of this podcast,
Mhm.
probably like the Game of Thrones season end series finale is
Mhm.
gonna have aired already.
Mhm.
But no, I was watching it last night. I kid you not, my palms were sweating, my heart was racing the whole time,
Yeah.
and this is probably the best, top of my list, number one best fight battle scene in um history of you know film, or in this case the small screens, television. It was awesome, and I have never seen an entire episode from beginning to end, and this episode was like over an hour long,
Yeah.
beginning to end, the whole battle.
Mhm.
It was impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and man, I got into Game of Thrones because everybody kept talking about it, and so I was like, All right, I'll give it a shot. Because I'm not really a big fan of like the Lord of the Rings movies, especially because they're so long, and
Mhm.
I don't want to deal with that. And also, like the Harry Potter ones, I don't know. It's just I've never been attracted to that. But then I was like, Game of Thrones. Well, let's just see it. And so I watched like the first 2 episodes, and I was hooked. I was like, whoa, what in the world just
Yeah.
happened?
It's an
Um,
intense show, and definitely not for the faint of heart, especially now that they have all these gruesome battles, and rewatching, the Battle of the Bastards, it's so graphic, and even though I'd seen it before, I winced a couple times because it really, all the story and the fantasy aside, I was commenting last night that it really puts into perspective, like, how intense war is, especially in that era where you have just cavalry charging at each other and it's like face to face combat and it's just so intense. And it's, these people are going in, especially in this last episode, prepared, you know, understanding that they may not make it. And it's just so the stakes are so high, and especially in that episode when they're fighting the White Walkers, it's gosh, you're on the edge of your seat, and they always do a great
yeah.
job of bringing it to, a certain like a point and making you feel devastated and then bringing, trying not to spoil it, but like having a conclusion that just lets you take a big sigh of relief, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I remember when the um one of the dragons died.
Mm,
Uh, that was I think well, I think it was a season ago actually, when the one of the dragons died, and oh, my heart just fell because I have a pet dog and that I love so much.
Sandy, right?
Sandy, yeah, little cuddly guy's sleeping right now on the
Mm,
the bed behind me, but um yeah, and so when through the times when early on in the series, when you got these 3 eggs and you don't know when they're going to hatch. In fact, I think it went on for like 2 seasons without hatching, which is crazy. I mean, so long. But then you kind of get to this point where you just uh, you've kind of grown up in a way with these dragons, and if you have pets, you kind of you feel attached to them. And so when this dragon died, there's 3 of them. When one of them died, I was so
mm.
devastated. I was just so devastated. I was like, I'm turning this thing off. I'm done. And then at the end of that episode, um the the dragon wakes up. This is like when everybody is able to get away, and but the White Walkers are just they're surrounding this dragon and whatnot. And
Mhm.
so one of the big ones kind of, I think, touches him or something like that. All of a sudden, I think the episode ends with the dragon opening its eye, and it's blue, and like, no, and yes, it's alive again. It's like this mixed emotion, like, oh, it's a White Walker dragon, but it's alive.
Yeah, when that happened, I was
Um,
and then I think that was the cliffhanger at the end of the episode. I was just like, "Uh-oh. It's
yeah,
just gonna
exactly.
get worse."
Yep,
But
what's
you
gonna
just have to,
happen?
as a Game of Thrones fan, you just have to come to terms with the fact that one way or the other, your heart is gonna get broken. Either a character that you care about is going to die, or something is going to happen that just is going to make you wanna throw something at the TV.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about um TV and movies and such. There's been a few movies out there that have tackled the news industry, from
Mhm,
comedy to drama.
mhm.
So when you watch, oh well, I mean, my favorite one is Anchorman, of course. But when you see these movies out there that tackle the industry that you're actually working,
Mhm.
how do you feel about that? And do you watch these movies with like a jadedness to you or to it? Or how do you what do you think about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the time I'm disappointed. Um,
Uh-huh.
there was, well, I don't wanna trash any particular pieces of
Oh yeah, yeah,
media,
definitely not.
but, I feel like there is often a trope of the female journalist in particular, sleeping with her sources or being in love triangles or doing unscrupulous things to get the story, and that's not cool. Or you have some shows or whatever that show them as incompetent, as, not really understanding the subject matter. And I just want a show to show a reporter who is good at her job and doesn't have to get involved with anyone, and just is effective. I will say Spotlight was really good. That was a good movie.
Mhm.
And did
Eh,
show
uh-huh.
professional journalists doing their work. But the majority of things that I have seen, I'm disappointed. I am, though, looking forward to a movie that's coming out on Netflix that kind of addresses the jaded reporter. It's based on the trailer. It's about someone who is allegedly going around giving people money, I think it is, and the reporter is trying to figure out who this good Samaritan is, who this good Sam is, and the trailer kind of uh, insinuates or kind of previews that she's like her uh, view of humanity is being changed or made better by this good Samaritan. It's probably going to be like a rom-com, and it's very lighthearted, but you know from what I've seen so far, it looks like it'll be good.
Uh, Do you know what it's called?
I think it's called Good Sam, and it's
Mm.
coming out this month on Netflix. But yeah, I'm hoping, and that's kind of the film major, I guess you could say, or the film lover in me is like, I just really want positive representation, and I'm sure there are other movies that I haven't seen. I think uh, there are some, especially when it comes to international journalists that are a lot more serious and positive, in terms of the impact of journalists' work. But, I'm thinking of certain things that I've seen recently in American media that are just, you know, disappointing.
Exactly. Oh man. Well, I think uh, I'm gonna have to see this Good Sam and just to see what that's about. I really do enjoy, watching these films that tackle the world of journalism because I am always so curious to see how they're going to portray the reporter
Mhm,
or the camera guy or the person behind the scenes.
mhm.
Did you ever watch a show called, I think it was called Newsroom, and I think it was actually on HBO too.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Yeah, that go ahead.
Well, it had some good things and some not so good things, but, it's worth watching, I will say that.
um and uh, yeah, I mean, I guess just going back real quick to being a first generation on your dad's side and then a second generation on your mom's side. I mean, that's still, I mean, it's not like you're a 10th generation. I think my wife is like 13th
Wow,
generation
that's
Santa
awesome.
Santa Barbara. Yeah, no,
Wow.
it's I'm always I think at one point I'm gonna have to interview her for the
Yeah,
podcast
you
and talk about
should.
that because I think it's I think it's fascinating. I love history.
Yeah.
It was one of my best subjects other than writing in school. But just going back to that aspect of it, um, how important and how is it that you feel and how important it is for you to be where you are now? I mean, I'm sure it's now taken a whole new meaning because I'm assuming no other family member is in the news business or in the position that you're in. So, how important is it now to you, being a first and second generation Latina in the United States, to be in the position that you are now?
I'm very proud. You're right. My family, a lot of them are in Mexico still. And, my dad's family is from a very small town in Mexico. It's called Teloloapan in Guerrero, Mexico. And I haven't been able to go in many years, but what I remember was that it was um, kind of in like a mountainous area, I think. But it was a small Mexican town. My dad he was a mechanic, and his dad was a mechanic, and a lot of his he comes from a family of like 19 brothers and sisters, and a lot of the guys were mechanics. His mom was a baker, and they're have an aunt who's a teacher. Just it's pretty, I would say, humble background. My mom's side is from Sinaloa, Mexico, and my grandma, she was, the one that I mentioned before that she worked in the field. She has since retired and has gone back to Mexico, and she lives on uh, this little, I would call it a village almost, because they don't even have a post office or a cemetery, I don't think. Definitely not like a formal police department or city hall. It's out in the desert, and it's, I think, about an hour from like the major city there, Culiacan. And I went 2 summers ago to visit her, and had no cell phone service, no Wi-Fi, maybe a handful of channels on the TV, and it was really nice to disconnect and just go and
Yeah.
be in well, it wasn't that quiet because there were chickens and roosters and that kind of thing, but just to relax and be in that kind of simple lifestyle. So I think for them it was a surprise. My mom has always been very supportive. She's like, you've always had crazy ideas. Wanting to work for the United Nations. I think at one point I talked about being an international prosecutor. She's like, you've always had wild ideas. And she's never doubted me. She's always supported me. Um, but absolutely, it it was not something that I think we ever envisioned, because I think it's really important for young people to see the possibilities, and that's why going to college was so important. It showed me what was out there, what was possible, and I think it's hard for people to dream if they don't see what they can achieve. And so for me, it's very exciting. I'm doing a career day on Wednesday here in Kansas City, Kansas, and I love sharing my story and talking to young kids and letting them know that as long as you work hard and you believe in yourself and you're a good person, you do it you do it genuinely, you could do whatever you want to do. It's not going to be easy, but it's not impossible. And especially for someone like me who, being first generation in college, I actually reached out to Jorge Ramos when when I graduated from college, and I said, I kind of feel like I'm on an inner tube floating in the ocean. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't have anyone who's been here before. I'm in uncharted territory. And he wrote me a very lovely email. He said, your parents have gone through so much, and he said, you have to be extraordinary.
Hmm.
And that was like, yes. It was very reaffirming, and it said, it just made me feel like it's going to be a wild ride and they're going to be ups and downs, but I can do it. And I'm hoping that my little sister will be inspired to do whatever it is that she wants to do, and know that it might be scary, but she can do it too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think I think people need to have more inspirational role models like yourself out there. That's one of the reasons why I really wanted you on as a guest here in this podcast, because I think your story is just amazing, and you have something that resonates with a lot of people, and especially a lot of Latinos and first generation here in this country, where parents have sacrificed a lot to get here and to make a better life, and to see first generation do amazing things, like, and accomplish amazing great things like you have.
Mm.
That's an inspiration to me and to a lot of people. And
Thank you.
yeah, yeah, of course. And um as we wrap things here, I gotta say, I think you're probably my longest interview yet, but I love it. I love it, and I think I could talk to you for days about this, about Game of Thrones, of course.
Yeah.
Um,
That was always my
but
problem. When I was in 2nd grade, my teacher, she said I talked a lot, and usually teachers would send home, like, a behavior report or whatever. She would put me next to the quiet kids so that I would get them out of their shells. So, since
oh,
I was a kid, I've
interesting.
been a talker.
And there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you have good stuff to say.
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, I've been enjoying our conversation, and I don't know, I might have you back on as a guest, of course, but like I said, I could talk to you
I
for
would love that.
days.
Yeah.
But let's pretend for a moment we have a time machine,
Okay.
and you could go back, and I don't know if you can hear, there's some sirens going outside my home. So I live in Oxnard now. Um,
Oh, yay!
but yeah, that's the only downside to that is, well, I live in a relatively safe neighborhood, but that entails that there's like a police station nearby and a fire
Okay.
station nearby. So if they have to respond to some other part of town,
Mhm.
they usually come from here, and then from my area, and then that's where I hear all these sirens. So there was some loud sirens out there. I don't know if the microphone picked it up or not, but
Slightly,
let's
yeah.
just okay, so let's pretend you have a time machine.
Mhm.
You could go back in time to any place that you wanted to,
Ooh.
but for the sake of this, let's just pretend you're going back to the very humble beginnings of Bianca Beltran. um what would you tell your past self? What tip, what advice would you give your past self that now that if you knew it then, things would be a little different? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question because I think things have turned out pretty good, all things considered, but, you know, I definitely would say to myself, because I'm saying this to my sister now, is listen to your mother, you know? Um, because she has always said that I have been my toughest critic, and I have always um, set really high expectations for myself and pushed myself to succeed. And she used to tell me, I mean, hundreds of things that I should have listened to, like, appreciate your curls and your eyebrows and all the things that you hated about yourself when you were a kid that now are in fashion. But more
Mhm.
importantly, enjoy every moment. When I went to like a college graduation yesterday for a story, and I go into high schools, and I'm watching my sister grow up, and all of these moments, they go by so fast. And she says, my mom used to say, these are the best 4 years of your life. These moments you'll never get back, and that's so true. Um, so I would just tell myself to live it more, breathe it all in, every single moment, and I've definitely learned to do that, and I'm doing that now. But you know,
Mhm.
when you're young, you're just trying to get somewhere. You're trying to graduate high school. You're trying to go to college. You're trying to graduate college. You're trying to get a job. There's always something in the future that you're trying to get to. And it's easy to just let the present moment pass you by. And you just never know, like, what's going to happen. So it's just best to take it all in.
Well, Bianca, I always like to end the podcast with my guests' uh, pet peeves. So, what are your pet peeves? Well, what is your uh, pet peeve or pet peeves that come to your mind right now?
Well, this is a really weird one. um, I cannot stand the sound of when people bite on their forks. And
Oh man,
my
I'm not laughing because I do it. I like I don't do it, but it's just It's so funny to
Um,
hear that.
yeah,
That's a new one for
it
me.
sounds like it's kind of like when, the nails on the chalkboard for me. It just gives me the chills, and my boyfriend does it all the time, and I just it's weird, but that's my pet peeve, which is funny because my mom's pet peeve is crooked forks. She doesn't like it when one of the tongs on the fork is like sticking out. So that's mine.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I love you so much, my dear friend, and I
Aw.
really am happy that you were able to, be on this podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
Oh, I had such a fun time talking to Bianca, and I feel like we could have just talked more for hours. So I might just have to bring her back on the podcast at some point and continue the conversation. But I know she had to go to work as well, and I just really want to thank her again for taking the time to sit down with me over an hour and on a Sunday when it's the day we're recording this episode, to just chat with me about her career and herself, and giving some advice to those that might be thinking about getting into the news business. I just loved how well-rounded this interview was, and I hope that all of you can take something positive away from it. All right. Well, if you like this episode and you love the podcast, please tell your friends and family and subscribe to it wherever you subscribe for your podcast. We're on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Music stores. Tune in so that way you can listen to it in your Sonos speakers. Just everywhere that you can find the podcast. And please review it. I would love to hear your comments as well, and your questions. So if you have any questions or comments, email hangrymexicanpodcast @gmail.com. And I have that email also written down in the description of this episode. So be sure to do that, because I'd love to read some of those comments, some of those questions in the next episode. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, good night, good luck.